thank you for joining and welcome to our Smiley Talk. The future of education is now. So this is being run in collaboration with the Cambridge Education Festival, and it is being hosted by Ray, our Smiley Movement Education Ambassador, who is also a head teacher in Cambridge. So Ray's going to be hosting the talk, introducing our speakers very shortly, but I'm just going to give you a very quick summary of Smiley Movement. So we are a non-profit. We're sponsored by the original Smiley brand, and we have the overarching aim of inspiring people to drive forward positive change in the world, to inspire communities and to inspire people to take action. So we do that through these Smiley Talks. We have a positive news site called Smiley News. And through all our work, we align it with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So no poverty, zero hunger. Obviously, this talk very much fits in with the goal quality education. So we are streaming live on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube today. And if you do have any questions, just pop them in the comments and we will feed them through to our speakers nearer the end of the hour. So we'll be monitoring those and feel free to send them in. So without further ado, I think I'm going to pass over to Ray now to introduce everyone. And yeah, look forward to the talk.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I'm really excited to be here this afternoon and to have this conversation around the future of education. The future is now. And perhaps before I introduce our guests this afternoon, I just want to say something about that title, because having been in education for almost 30 years, there's almost this driver around trying to change education and think about the future of education. But when we look at the opportunities that we have around us today, maybe instead of thinking about 10 years in the future or 20 years in the future, we really need to be thinking about what's happening for our children that are in our classrooms, or our young people in their colleges, or our young people in society, and whether we're getting it right for them today and not always thinking about what they're going to be like in the future. So that, I hope that's given an idea of how I want to approach this conversation. So this afternoon, I'm joined by David Lett and Zubair Junjun Jr. And I'm going to give a brief introduction to them and also say that I'm hoping we'll also get to meet with Anita Kerwin Nye this afternoon. Anita is a Director of Strategy and Engagement at the Youth Hosteling Association for England and Wales. And we saw her briefly a few seconds ago, but I know she's having some technical issues, but we are hoping she'll join us because it would be great to hear her ideas and thoughts on this theme this afternoon. But without further ado, I'm going to turn now to Zubair and then David in turn. So Zubair is an educational activist. He is a social entrepreneur. He's the founder of Z Notes, and he's also an advocate of the SDGs, which, as you've heard from Amy, that's something that the Smiley movement is keen to also promote. And I'm also delighted to be joined by David this afternoon, David Lett, who is a co-founder of the New Meaning Foundation, which builds affordable housing for people who are experiencing homelessness, and also offers training and employment opportunities and hope for those living in poverty or disadvantage. So I'm really delighted to be joined by both of you this afternoon. But as I said at the beginning, I don't think I can really capture the work that you are doing and what you are interested in and your passion and your purpose in just a few headline statements about you. So I'm going to hand over now to Zubair. Can you explain a little bit more about what you are doing and how you're working with students and some of the innovations that you are involved in?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ray. And it's such a pleasure to be joining such amazing people. First of all, let me just say how much I agree with your statement. We shouldn't be talking about 10, 50, 100 years down the line. We need to be talking about now. We need to be talking about the young children and people who are in the education system and how we can be best supporting them. And my journey of education and becoming a social entrepreneur has very much started as a student myself. I started Z Notes as a way to address the inequalities I witnessed firsthand as an expatriate student, taking high stakes examinations and seeing that around me there were students who had some advantages while others didn't, whether that's through tutoring, that's through educational resources. And it just did not feel right that socioeconomic backgrounds and geographies can actually determine where and how you perform in the rest of your life. Zenotes leverages students and empowers students to co-create high quality educational resources, as well as provide a space for peer learning, completely open and freely accessible. And it is addressing education inequalities at these high stakes exams. And we've been able to reach almost 4 million students. So I started this back when I was 16, and thanks to hundreds of volunteers and contributors, a team of about 40 volunteers today, we've been able to reach more and more students all over the world. Alongside Zenotes, I also am very much passionate about, the unlocking opportunities and the social mobility that education can provide. And I do this in multiple hats. One of them is as a national youth leader for the Global Partnership for Education. This is a fund, the biggest educational fund, which specifically looks at systems transformation in the global south for education. And in addition to that, I'm also a youth advisory board member at the EY Foundation, as well as a board member at the Digital Education Futures Institute at the University of Cambridge. So doing a few things. The passion and the mission is all around reducing education inequality for young people everywhere.
I always love to hear about anybody with passion and mission, and it does sound like you're wearing many hats. And based on what you've said, I've already written down a couple of questions I'm going to follow up with you in
Absolutely.
a few minutes. Thank you. And David, I know that you are very much motivated by passion and purpose. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you co-founded New Meaning Foundation and why, and everything that you're involved in?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I guess it links back to a personal experience I had actually in my mid-20s when, very sadly, my mother passed away at 51. And I found myself a few months after that asking a question, well, what do I want my life to mean? And I never asked myself that question before. And it felt like a very, very important question. And I didn't have any way of answering it. I was university educated. I'd just been assessed by a company I was working for that I could become their chief exec. They had something like 25,000 employees. And I thought, how can I not be able to answer this question? So that led me on a journey that led me in 2008, together with my social enterprise business partner, John Evans, to start working in schools with a system called Proactive Life Skills. And we worked across lots of schools within the United Kingdom, helping young people who were struggling to associate any benefit from mainstream education in their lives to help them find that benefit. And then in 2014, we took the decision that actually what they needed was a different type of learning and teaching model, a different type of process, a different environment. We basically come to say that New Meaning now focuses on young people that aren't school shaped, and we help them discover for themselves how they can progress towards an independent life and to earn their own living. And we've grown quite rapidly over the last 7 years. We've got centres now in Cambridge, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, Oxfordshire, and Warwickshire. And we work with just on 300 young people a year across those centres. Many of them come in with no prior qualifications, very little achievement outcome from secondary school. And I know we're focusing on education today. We're very, very, very much reinforced. There's nothing wrong with those schools. It's just that those young people, the shape of that school, the way they operate, it just didn't suit those young people. And we find that they're able to succeed and reorientate and find meaning and purpose through our approach and models.
That sounds really fascinating, David. And just as I said before, that's already given me some questions I want to ask you. But if I can come back to what you were saying, Zubair, I mean, how does a 16-year-old set up, and I realize I should call it Z Notes and not Z Notes. How did you set that up at the age of 16? That's phenomenal.
Thank you so much. I think it's not as amazing as you would think. And to be honest, I look back, and the proudest is not that I set something up. The proudest that I am today is because so many young people have joined this mission. We're talking about tens of thousands of collective volunteer hours by young people who are often, considered to be lazy, stuck on Instagram and TikTok, and not really motivated. These are young people between the ages of 16 to 18, 19, who really care about each other, and they believe in the collective, and they believe in community. So my kind of the chills come only when I think about the fact that this is not Zubair anymore. This is not the small thing that I started, but it's actually a
amazing.
global student movement.
Wow.
It's really quite, I think, technology, especially, there's always something about timing as well. You know, there are so many tools out there that you can start building, creating, and putting yourself out there on the internet with very little. I remember the only thing I asked for from my dad was $100 on his credit card just to get the domain and the hosting. And following that, everything has grown organically. We've bootstrapped at this point. We've been around for 8 years. We've built our own learning platform. We've reached, you know, so many young people. We've built partnerships with the UN, the kind of some of the biggest schools in the country, and it's all been because of a motivation, a drive, and young people joining that mission. So I think we're at a really exciting point, and I think if I pick your next question and bring it a little bit further along, because in terms of what our society is looking like, we have so many opportunities, and we have this kind of space to grow and explore these things. We have the tools to do so. We have the amplification technology that allows that. So I was in a good position in my time, and I had the kind of the background in my own personal story, which motivated me so deeply that, you know, very much serendipitously, we've been at this point 8 years later.
Thank you. And just as you're saying that, I'm thinking it was a personal story that motivated you, David. And obviously, I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your mum, because that would have been a very young age to lose somebody. And I'm trying to think about how that affected you to then think about young people and what they were needing and the skills that they were needing. And I can't quite see the joy in what how did that happen, that you then went into thinking about education? Oh, sorry, you're on mute there, David.
Sorry. I love it when I always meet social entrepreneurs quite a lot, and I love it when they say it's not as amazing as you think, and it's clearly amazing. So I just love it. That humility is always in a social entrepreneur. Yeah. And we always say, you know, we're always getting congratulated, and isn't this amazing? It's amazing what you've done. And we always return it back to the young people. All we do is create an environment that they find meaningful, and we keep reshaping that environment until they find it meaningful. So give you an example, we had one young lad that persistently turned up at closing time. So we would close at 4. He persistently turned up at 4, and we would just say, right, so let's go. Let's do the work now. And he goes, but you're shut. And we go, no, we're never shut. So you want to turn up at 4. You're here. You've taken the time out to come. We'll crack on and do 2 hours now. And over a period of 3 months, we got him adjusted and built the relationship, and he was turning up at 9 o'clock, you know, with everybody else. So it was an interesting journey for him. But I think that comes back to it. What I think I realized that I'd not got from school was I didn't know how to make sense of the massive experience I'd had. I'd never anticipated having it. You know, if mum had died at the age of 85 plus or 90 plus or 100 plus, it would have felt acceptable. That's how life works, isn't it? So when this came along, it wasn't how life worked. And when I reached into my kit bag of education, I thought, well, nothing's prepared me to help me make sense of this. So we then started to explore, well, or how is it that people make sense of their life journey? And we just felt that both myself and John, we both had experiences at secondary school where we felt we left highly qualified, but really not really understanding our own minds, not really understanding our own place in the world, not really understanding, well, I'm 17-year-old, what does it mean? You know, so we decided that, you know, that's where we wanted to put our time in. And I think, you know, that would be my main focus to this day is about helping those young people understand the impact of life so far, and then how they could shape that impact in the future. And just to finish, in my experience, most young people they simply don't grasp the principle of choice. That choice isn't over any experience you might have. I didn't have a choice over what happened to my mum, but there's always a choice over your attitude to that experience. And that is the greatest asset. the greatest strength that human beings have. So yes, school hasn't worked for you. Yes, you're not school shaped. Yes, you've been forced to stay there all this time, but you still have a choice over what attitude you take to where you find yourself, and we move it on from there.
David, I'm finding what you're saying so inspiring, and I love the turns of phrase that you're talking about. You know, nothing had prepared me to make sense of life's journey, and you're talking about children not being school shaped. Do you think then, and I don't mind really who answers this question, but coming on to my question, obviously I'm in a mainstream, well, not obviously, I'll explain, I'm in a mainstream primary school. Do you think that the education system is right for what we want, or what society needs, or what our young people need? Are there other things we're not thinking about? Zubair, what's your thoughts?
It's an interesting question, and one I was debating with my mentor only the other night at dinner. And I am someone who's really, fit with the school system. I did my A levels, GCSEs, I got to uni, I got my first class degree. All of those things kind of fit together, and it's not an achievement in the sense that it's the fact of the matter is that there are only very few people who will have that kind of very clear track, and yet we end up with young people left out and unsupported so quickly. We look at the kind of the curiosity that we kill so quickly. You'll never ask a 5-year-old to stop, playing and understanding and forming stuff in the sand with clay and whatever. You will never, you will always be trying to stop your little children who is just starting to read. Oh, you need to go to bed because you can't read anymore. And yet in a couple of years later, you're going to see those excitements and energy level just drip down and go away. Something that's particularly kind of like close to my heart is as a mathematician. I hear so many people. I went through university, and every time it's like, "Oh, what do you study?" I study math, and the reaction is, "Oh my gosh, gasp, horror, disgust." And you're like, why have we normalized this behavior that mathematics is something that you can just hate? And I think it's such a clear example of something we have as a society, and our education system has agreed to that. Hey, we can just literally disregard it. And I specifically for math, I'd say that, young people are not given the capacity and space to learn it, because it's one of the first points of your academic journey where you abstractify, where you think of stuff which has no physical quantification or physical engagement, right? So these abstract skills are really hard, and some kids develop very quickly, some don't. And you simply, for someone who doesn't know how to do, mixed fractions by the age of this, you've just said that math is not for you. You've hindered them, you've kind of like curtailed them, you've suffocated them from such an early age, and it just feels incredibly sad. I think we're definitely in an education system that's not fit for purpose, but I want to bring back, Ray, what you started off with is that we can't be saying 10, 15, 20 years down the line. We need to be talking about now. How can we start affecting it now? And we're seeing some incredible unlocking achievements, opportunities that have come out of whether that's technological based, or it's app based, or it's in-person better practices by teachers. We're seeing it evolve so quickly, right? And the pandemic, if it has done anything, it's thrust us further to start to accept those different educational systems and models. We are seeing, young children, young kids, and young people going off and getting micro-credentials. We are seeing new universities pop up, the London Interdisciplinary School, the first one that is not simply looking at academic grades as the only thing. We are seeing all these little applications which are outside your mainstream education system, but people and young people are learning from it. So I think it's changing, it's in flux, and we need to be making sure that we're highlighting them as incredible, pathways for our young people to pursue. And as much as we accept them, that's when society and policy can actually reflect that as well. It's a chicken and egg situation. Unless we have acceptance by the general public, we can't take it one step further. So that's where I sit, and I'd love to hear what David thinks as well, because this is particularly the kind of space that you're working in, especially with the kind of working with young people who do not fit the school mold.
Yeah, I think you should be right. I take a very, very simple approach. I mean, I went back and studied psychology in the late 90s as a result of the experience I mentioned earlier about my mum. And because I'd read the work of an Austrian psychiatrist called Viktor Frankl, who was Jewish and lived through the concentration camps, and he made a comment that I can't say in all honesty that the concentration camp experience wasn't meaningful in many ways and didn't subsequently help him to go on and do some amazing work within the field of psychology following World War II. And I thought, well, if someone can find meaning in that environment, then I've got to read more about this person. I then studied psychology to try and unpack it. And I think my simple view is formed by a belief that every human brain is innately focused on finding and making sense of every experience it encounters. That is what the human brain is designed to do. And I think the school system is much stronger than we think it is, but I think it's too narrowly focused, and it's too focused on feeding the experience in and inputting experience, and isn't really playing to the strengths that are inherently there within every human brain anyway. So every human brain innately wants to make sense of the environment it finds itself in, all the life experiences and situations it's got. And for me, the basic purpose of education should be, how does your brain do that? How do you do that? How do you come to understand the first 4 to 5 years of experiences you have before cognitive memory is even formed? You can't remember them, but you had them. Your brain decided this place speaks English, so we'll learn English. You decided that you'll learn to walk. There's lots of things your brain decided that you can't even remember it decided in the first 4 to 5 years, but your brain is making sense from the split second you're born. And I meet constantly the young people we work with. We start really working with them from 15, 16, 17 years old. They just, the life feels meaningless to them. They just think, well, I've just been stuck in the system that doesn't make sense to me. And I haven't been able to make sense of it because my brain doesn't happen to work that way. I'm being almost force-fed this input. And where we've worked in schools, where we've helped create a dialogue between the teachers and the students, so the students feel like they can bring their life experiences in and outside of the school into the school environment. So, why are we studying Shakespeare? Because there's probably 4 kids in the class that are going through Midsummer Night's Dream or Hamlet in their own lives. So let's make that the starting point. And I think for me, if we can, where education is missing the trick, is let's teach every young person's brain, or every young person, let's teach them how their brain is making sense of life's experiences, and so that they're left in a position where they focus on the strength they're gaining from it rather than the weaknesses they may perceive.
It's so sad to hear those experiences about young people feeling that life is meaningless, their experiences are meaningless. And I love the simplicity. It's profound, really, but simple, is this idea of just encouraging that dialogue with educators. And that's really important, isn't it? Making time for those voices to really be heard. But as Zubair, you're saying, our system, a lot of our system is geared towards an exam system. And you mentioned them earlier, the GCSEs, the A levels. And one of the most important, or one of the key unions, the ASCL union, talks about the idea that everything is set up for the forgotten third. We're setting up an education system in this country which is literally going to say a third of young people, if we're going to have a binary pass or fail view, are failing. So it doesn't make sense. And again, thinking about what you were talking about, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but along this idea of the future, there's been talk of 21st century skills or transferable skills. And earlier on, you talked, David, about how young people can't choose what happens to them, but they can think about their attitude. And your work, Zubair, you're talking about young people being able to co-create with each other. Now, arguably, those sorts of skills about a person's attitude, their ability to create, to co-create, to collaborate, they tend to fall into the skills that are not reading, writing, maths, those traditional skills that get so much of a lens. to what extent, David, do you think we emphasize in schools those transferable skills? Do you think that's something we should be doing more on?
Totally. Any legal work is of value. I get more value from the tube driver, the train driver, as we're discovering, than I do from the Prime Minister. So why is the Prime Minister classed as the top job? We've got to think about our language. When I became a governor of a secondary school that my daughter was going to, and the first September meeting I went to, the school talked about which universities the students had gone to and then closed down. And I put my hand up because I was in a school, and I got told, you don't have to put your hand up, you're a governor. I said, okay, but I'm in a school. And I said, well, who went on to do plumbing, hairdressing, care work, electricians, carpenters? Where are all that? Who, because we had 180 in our year 11. We've only got 80 gone to sixth form, 100 left. So what are they going to do at college? And the head teacher sat there, went bright red and said, I don't know. And I said, well, I want to know. So because I'm going to get masses of value out of a doctor and a lawyer, but I'm going to get probably more consistent value out of the person who collects my rubbish, the person who cuts my grass, the person who does my electrics than I am. So we should celebrate all forms. And we seem to have managed to develop, we've developed a hierarchy within society that you're going up if you go on to university, you're going sideways if you go to college. Well, why? I've met so many owners of building companies in the last 3 or 4 years that are worth millions, and they all left school at 14. So, now the system back then was different, but we should be celebrating any young person who's making a proactive and positive journey towards earning. And I always do this because to be quite upfront, I was done for shoplifting when I was 13, and Mum just says, I don't mind whatever you do in life, just make sure it's legal. So I always say, we should celebrate any young person that's progressing towards legal work.
That's really important. And you talked about hierarchy, and I'd written down here just before you were starting to talk, this idea, this 2-tier system. And you're absolutely right, because for a school, for example, can't function unless it's everybody pulling together and everybody is as valuable to the organization as I am leading the school. So Zubair, we were talking earlier, or just briefly, about this idea of innovation. And you were talking about new systems and models and digital credentials. And I know that David and I are involved in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough region of learning, which is actively going to introduce these digital credentials. And it's a really exciting project rolling out with the support of the RSA and other cities and regions of learning.
Yeah.
And what I particularly loved about what you said, Zubair, is this idea of acceptance. Because I feel like there's almost, I'd love to get your perspective on this. I feel like there's almost a 2-track thing happening. We've got education policy, which seems to be determined to maintain the status quo, with ideas of let's keep going with grammar schools, let's keep going with GCSEs and A levels.
Yeah.
And yet what we know is digital credentials, micro credentials, the co-creation and online world is taking off.
Yeah.
What can we do to change that? Do you have a view on what needs to change? And I love this idea of acceptance.
Yeah, and I feel like all I'm doing is referring back to like previous conversations, because I'm not very smart. All I do is I act like a sponge and take up knowledge from all these incredible people I'm surrounded by.
I think you sell yourself short, Zubair. You really do.
I had this incredible conversation yesterday. We hosted a brunch with some awesome edtech people, and they were talking about City as a school and what the RSA is doing in terms of the city as a learning space. We're already seeing the change happen, and I think technology being rapid and faster is always going to be the one that is going to accept these things faster. So we can see Apple going out to set up their own university. We're seeing a whole bunch of tech companies accepting young people without formal qualifications. We're seeing boot camps being a huge way of not simply for young people to get into employment, but actually even marginalized communities to find meaningful and honest and dignified work which is so important. Dignity is and David, you talked
I
about
love
legal, but
that.
I would argue that everyone should feel that they are respected in the jobs that they do, and we need to make sure that as a society we respect
I love
each
that.
individual. So I think that the evolution is already happening, and it's always driven in our capitalist system by money. So if a tech company realizes that actually, if a young person they can get at 19 and train themselves is a better engineer than someone they send to a CS degree at the University of, I don't know, Leeds, and they find out that they need to train them up in the same way anyway. What makes more sense? Well, get this guy at 19 and 18, 17 out of school. So we're going to see this transition more rapidly, and it will translate over to the other industries as well. What is really interesting for me, and this is something I witnessed with my younger sister, baby sister. She's just doing her GCSEs now, and she's uh, gone through school through the pandemic. She's gone and studied on Zoom, and she's done all these kind of things herself. And now she's studying in such a different way. She's using school as a space to come together and to socialize and become part of a community. But she's also learning with all the tools. She's using Notion to take notes. She's using Zoom lessons to do past paper questions together with friends. This is something probably that she wouldn't want me to tell you, but every Zoom lesson that was running also had a WhatsApp back channel, because yes, we want to hear the content that the teacher is telling us, but actually what we also love is the fact that the guy sitting next to me or my friend on the other table is actually going to give me some advice, or they're going to mess around, and that's also part of the engagement. That's part of the lesson. That's part of the classroom. So the school, in the fact that it brings people together and it creates a space, and that so many teachers are like mentors for us, those are really critical pieces which I don't think are going to be taken out. We're always going to be seeking out these communities. I spend time with homeschooled kids, and they're some of the most sharpest people, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to find places where they can engage with young people their age or even older. So community is a human thing, and we need that, and that's why Xenos is always called a community-led learning platform. But I do think that moving forward, we're going to see and realize that actually, a university degree does not translate to what I want, and for some people it does. And we shouldn't be kind of making distinctions, but there are very, very clear and successful pathways. David, you mentioned building companies. There are so many young people out there and experienced people out in the world, successful people that have shown that an education, a traditional education, does not need to translate into a kind of a certain success by the standards of this world.
Some really pluralistic approaches to education then emerging, and I was just thinking, I've never thought of this idea of this background WhatsApp channel. We do it. I can promise you I'm not doing it now, but I recognize it, but I've never ever heard that talked about. And so I'm really just reflecting on whether this new world is being documented, and that approach, that sort of multi-platform approach to education. Dignity in work, the evolution is happening now. That sounds really positive and exciting. So that's fantastic. David, you talked about a young man. He turns up at your door at 4 o'clock, and you open the door to him. And what happens then? What is he learning? What experiences? Just so that I can really understand what's going on for young people. Is it physical work? Is it lectures? What kind of educational experience is that young person having with you?
First and foremost, it's about their own attitude and the own way they make sense. The way in which they test boundaries is taken a different way. There's so many different small micro examples of the young man who walks in with 6 cans of Red Bull, offers me one, and I say, no, I get more energy from water. And he looks at me and he says, you're stupid. This is energy drink. It gives you energy. And I go, no, if I have a glass of water and a banana, I get more energy than that. And I just walk off. And he just left there sort of standing in the middle of the room going, what? And then comes up to me half an hour later, dumps 4 cans on my desk and says, you're right. I drank one, and 10 minutes later, I had less energy than when I started. So where do I get a banana from? And those are quite extreme examples, but that's the type of thing. The young man who turns up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he's supposed to be there at 9 o'clock, and he looks at you, and he's looking at you because he knows you're going to tell him off. And what do? You say, hey, great to see you, crack on. And he goes, but I'm late. And I go, oh, what time are you supposed to be here? And he goes, oh, 9 o'clock. You know that. And I go, oh, what's the time now? It's 10 o'clock, you idiot. You know that. And I go, oh, well, that's all right. You've missed a little bit, but you can get on with it. Thanks for turning up. And they're baffled. Their brains are so used to making sense of, I'm going to be told off, that when you just reinforce it's great to have them here and get on with it, that's what they do. So the next day he turns up at 9:45 and we have a bit of the same exchange. And then as he's walking past me, I go, but guess what? And he goes, what? You're 15 minutes earlier than yesterday. So that's a strength. And he just laughs and he just, you're crazy. And I go, yep, that's exactly what I am. And I get called weird more than anything. And I go, yep, that's exactly what I am. I must be, because I'm working with you. So I think it's about that. To be honest, it's really the number one thing that we seek to deliver. Yes, there's a vocational element, there's construction, there's a work placement-based program, there's a life skills-based program, there's a sports and public services, there's an achieve life skills type setup. But the main thing is about helping them realize, helping them make sense that actually I can achieve. Actually, I can find somewhere I fit. Actually, I can make my own choices. Actually, I have got strengths. Actually, if I can put in an hour of effort and focus, if I really, really want to, and I find something that's meaningful for me to focus on. Sadly, we've got 4 or 5 years of layered onion to sort of slowly help them strip away, where they don't believe they've succeeded anything. And so that's the first point of, or how do you actually help that? So it's a constant trial and error on our side of, there's no magic words we'll say. So all we do is try and create an environment that young person responds to in a meaningful way. So they find it meaningful, they start responding to it, they then start growing in that environment. So we just seek to adjust, flex the environment, which we're in. So we're playing a role in it. But look, there's no set of magic words any human being can say to any other human being that will provoke change. The decision to change in any given point in time, even if you might have 50 people around you while you're making the change, in the split second when every human brain decides to change, that human's on their own. That's a personal, unique decision for that individual. So all we try and do is maximize the chance that the decisions they start to make are, I can succeed. I can. And I must admit, just to finish, Ray, I'm not a massive fan of let's help everybody reach their full potential. Well, what on earth is that? So people say to me, you help kids reach their full potential. I said, no, because that means I'm labeling it. That means I'm putting out what that might be. What I help young people do, if I'm really honest, is find and shape a meaningful life.
Amazing.
And that's what we do. So I'm not a fan of full potential. You're hearing a lot with the Tory party, leadership thing at the moment. We've got to help people reach their full potential. Well, again, that's very presumptive. That's very much well, what is that? Who's going to define that? If it's going to be defined by the young person, then let's just let them define what set of words they want to use to describe success in the future.
Just listening to you, David, my heart is just beating, because it's just, I feel so inspired by what you've said, because of course I've read the words new meaning when I've seen your webpage and read about you, but suddenly you've really lifted that from the page or lifted that from the screen, because now I feel like I get it, this idea that it's about the young people finding that meaning in what they're doing and finding the meaning of their place in the world. And it's just so powerful.
But
and
Ray,
I'm really
just sorry to jump in, but the ironic thing, the absolute ironic thing in all of this is they already knew it. They just were not given the opportunity through the school system to express it. Once we get their trust, and we have to earn that, then they start to share with us what they shared in year 7, year 8, at some point in education. And this is where I have a major bugbear with education, and especially secondary. It just gets shut down because it isn't what the too narrowly focused system is trying to get them to do. I want you to focus on these particular subjects. It's inherent within every single human being to find and shape meaning. So if you just work on that principle, that human will tell you what's meaningful. They'll tell you where they want to direct their time. And sometimes you got to be patient and persistent and helping nurture it out of them could take a while for some. Some will just come up and say, I want to be a vet, I want to be an architect, I want to be a nurse, I want to be whatever it is. But others might take a while, need to experience different things to understand what it is. But it just seems to me we fight against the innate strength that every person has. We ignore it, and then we wonder why, you know, a third of young people are failing our system. What sort of system is that? When a third of them fail, how meaningful is that?
Yeah.
What a crazy system.
And what's also struck me by what you were talking about is that role of the trusted, significant mentor or adult that's going to help guide them, or rather just to bring out, as you say, what's already inherent within them before they even start. It was always there, but just wasn't allowed to be expressed. And you talked earlier on about the importance of dialogue and just supporting teachers to be more dialogic with the children. And one of the things I know as an educator is that no meaningful education can happen without those meaningful relationships between the educator or the teacher and the child or the student. And just as you were talking, I just thought, this makes me think of this motif, because for me, this is really important.
Brilliant.
And we use this a lot in our school. It's this sense of, and in the middle of it is, as probably you'll know, there's a little candle, and the light that can emerge, the sense of purpose, the sense of joy when we come together and we support and nurture each other. And I suppose one of the things that can get shut down in schools is looking at how much time children are spending in schools, and are they having those meaningful dialogue, discussion, conversation, so they can talk about who they are, what they're passionate about, what their goals are, what's stopping them, what's encouraging them, what's enabling them to not fulfill their potential, but to find meaning. We have some questions coming through, and I'm really grateful to the people who sent a few questions in. So I think now might be a good time to look at the questions. So here's an interesting one. As parents, what do we do if we don't feel our parents are invested in education? What can we do as parents? What do we do if we don't feel, as parents, our parents are invested in education? What can we do?
It might be our children perhaps are invested in education.
Maybe it's our children if we don't feel our...
Don't know.
Let's... so I'm going to wonder I'm wondering whether there is a question here that is about... I think it meant teachers. That's what we've got. As parents, what do we do if we don't feel our teachers are invested in education? Gosh, that's quite a great question and a challenge. Zubair, I'm coming to you first.
I just realized that it could be placed in the beginning as well as teachers. What do we do if parents aren't invested? And so
maybe
we have
that way around. I don't know. It'd be great to have that
new meaning. Everything has a new meaning of how we think.
True.
By the way, David, sorry, this is going to be a tangent, but I can't stop thinking about it. You should be thinking about new meaning and also attaching a K at the start, because they knew the meaning before they came in, because new meaning and new meaning. That. So new play on words.
Love that. New meaning.
It's interesting because the global South and the people that I'm dealing with, or the young people that are kind of engaging with Xennotes, many of their parents come from a very traditional background, and they have this kind of expectations of, David, you mentioned this, like the lawyer, doctor, kind of engineer type mindset, that their young children, that's the only pathway they can take. So I wonder whether the kind of investment of parents can also be detrimental, especially if that creates an extra pressure. David, you also talked about well-being and creating safe spaces, and I think that is so crucial, especially in this day and age when we have young people who are facing such incredible challenges and stress levels, which are unprecedented, right? We never had these type of stress levels years ago, but now the competition for those same degree, position and places, it's just way too much. So I'm just like kind of like riffing here and kind of like wanting to hear from you as well, like the pressures that parents and even teachers might be giving on young people, and how they can address those, and how they can still, beyond just being kind of told what to do, actually feeling like there's only one way they can go, and that causing them to break down. as a community of students, we have about 15,000 members on Discord, and they use it on a continuous basis as a space for them to come together because they're studying the same subjects and doing the same exams. But they also talk a lot about their own struggles, and we have channels like Venting, and where we talk about, or young people just literally send out paragraphs and paragraphs of text saying what they're feeling, what their pressures are, why they're feeling these things, and it's heartbreaking really to read some of those messages, but it's also hugely encouraging to know that Zenotes and other online communities can provide a space for those young people to speak about those things. And secondly, for also the kind of the young people that are in that community to be able to support each other, because it's not a solo journey. Many of us have come from backgrounds where the pressures were similar, and so I'm almost like flipping this question back to both of you to say that there is that kind of level of investment in terms of care and encouragement that a parent needs to really give to the young children. But also, what if that is stifling? What if that is not allowing them to grow and develop in the spaces that they want to? What if it isn't that conventional pathway that they've been down through? And oftentimes we have these such inherent biases in terms of what we think success is, because if your parents are doctors, you're very much likely to be a doctor as well, because that's the only success that's been seen by them. I wonder what your thoughts are. I'm sorry for becoming the interviewer.
No, that's good. That's absolutely fine. David, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think coming back to the central question, if teachers aren't invested, my first response was, well, how do you know? And also, we don't know what experiential journey they've been on. And having been a governor for 6 years, they are under masses of pressure. The pressure is unbelievable. When you've got 40% of new teachers leaving the profession after 5 years because it wasn't what they thought it would be, the experience was so negative, they got out. So if I would, I used to do this as a parent, because I am a parent, and if I felt that I sought to try and understand the teacher's perspective first and foremost. What pressure are they under? How do they see the education that they're supposed to be delivering? What does it mean to them? So the first point in principle is, don't assume just because of the way you think they're interacting that you understand them. So what I'd encourage you to do as a parent is meet the teacher. And go and organize a meeting and say, hey, why did you become a teacher? I'd like to get to know you. I know it's a big commitment, but we do work within a society where supposedly everything's supposed to be done and dusted in 5-minute bits, because we work in a technology world, don't we? Everything should be faster. But actually, many of the basic human problems are mental health based problems that sometimes take time and patience to work through. So I think as a parent, get to know the teacher. More easy to do at primary because you've got that teacher for the year. Less easy at secondary when they're going around lots of different teachers. And I think don't be scared to sort of put your perspective into the school and keep pushing it. Keep pushing. I did. My youngest daughter was told she shouldn't do triple science because she should stay on double science, because I didn't think she was academically capable. Well, she just got a first-class honours degree, master's degree at Liverpool. Literally got it awarded 2 weeks ago, and she just. So we knew what she could do, and we knew her brain would turn on if she was actually given the signal that she could achieve more than what she was being currently told. Otherwise, she's just going to float along in the set she's in. So we convinced the school to put her on triple science and give her a go, and she just took off. She was in bottom set for maths. She got the maths awarded at the end of her A levels. So as a parent, make sure that you can be an advocate for, and sometimes it takes persistence. Polite persistence pays. It's a phrase that we have. Always remain polite, remain persistent, and ultimately it will pay off, and the school will listen. Because it's being hit. 1,200 students is 2,500 parents. That's a lot of parents. So you have to be persistent and understand the school's perspective and then work with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, David. The pressures on teachers are astronomical at the moment, and the attrition within the system is quite unsustainable. We're struggling to find teachers and support staff in schools at the moment. So we need to think about what we can do to support our teachers who are doing quite a very challenging role. I know a lot of people are doing that. I'm going to go on to another question here, which is, my child, I made an assumption there. My child is turning their nose up at an apprenticeship. What are your thoughts on apprenticeships?
I think they're fantastic. And my response to that again would be, what does your child mean? Where is their perspective coming from?
Mm-hmm.
So you could ask them 4 simple questions. What do you know about apprenticeships, and where do you think they might be useful? What do you know about apprenticeships, and why might you see them in a negative light? So what's informing your opinion? What have you learned from that about apprenticeships? And then, from that discussion, so it'll be somewhere along their journey, a discussion would have happened, an experience would have happened, where it could be a comment from a teacher, it could be a comment from friends, it could be anywhere. But first of all, what we don't tend to do enough of with our children is understand what they mean. And we did an exercise some years ago on values, and we had parents in the room and students in the room, and we put them in 2 camps, and we asked them to come up with 5 keywords that describe their life values. And 4 of those words were exactly the same for both groups. And one of them was independence. They valued independence, but independence meant something quite different to the parent than it did for the child. So independence meant I should be allowed out at 11 o'clock at night to that party to the child. For the parent, no, you need to be home at 10 o'clock. And that's where the meaning started the friction started to happen. So when there's a statement like they turn their nose up at apprenticeships, well, that's the point where you start asking questions. And that's a core principle at New Meaning. You get change through questions, because questions create an automatic trigger in the other party to respond. If you make statements, then you're not asking the other person to do anything. You're just making a statement. If you ask a question, how are you today? Or, what are you watching at the moment? Or what do you think of the weather? Or sometimes you just ask a random question and they just look at you like, oh, why are you asking me that? Well, because I wanted to disrupt your brain pattern to the point where you stop looking at your phone and you looked at me. So question, just keep asking questions and be open to the answers and explore it. And, through that dialogue, because, at the end of the day, our children transition from order takers to not wanting any orders at all in short measure. I personally think humans are one of the only animals on the planet where the teenagers force themselves out of the house. They seek the independence before the parents are even ready for it. And that 15 to 23 cognitive reshift that goes on in the teenage brain. It's the teenager. I mean, through nearly all of our evolution, Ray, if you hadn't figured it out by 18, you were in serious trouble because your parents probably weren't here. So there's an evolutionary necessity for a teenager to figure out its social set and become independent. And all we need to do in society is flow with that and work with that, and we could get quite different results.
The brain isn't fully formed till about 24, so we're asking children at quite a...
I don't think mine ever has been, but
I didn't like to say, David. Couldn't possibly comment. But yes, I mean, we ask children to do quite a lot around GCSE time, A-level time, when they are coping with so much hormonal change in the body.
Yeah.
And when we were talking earlier about, Zubair, you were talking about the well-being of our young people and our students. There was a report that came out recently, just a couple of weeks ago, that said 50% of our students in colleges and university are having really difficult times with their well-being and their emotional health. Zubair, if I can ask you your thoughts on that question. A child's turning their nose up on apprenticeships. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, I bring a global perspective, and apprenticeships are still not, they used to be a much more common approach in many parts of the world, and then they kind of disintegrated. It was not systematized, but now it's kind of emerging again. I'm also associated with the EY Foundation, which particularly looks at, those young people who are not in education, employment, or training. And apprenticeship, of course, is an incredibly successful pathway for young people to get into some of the biggest companies in the world. So the Big Four all have apprenticeship programs. So I would say that there are absolutely misconceptions I don't have as much knowledge about the UK systems, but from what I do know is that there is so much support available. And in fact, I know so many apprenticeship programs which actually lead to qualifications as well. So I think we had a few podcast episodes with some young ladies from the BT apprenticeship program, and they were all pursuing a degree while working, and by the end of their 4 or 5 years, they got the experience and they'd been able to apply those skills that they were learning. And I would say that, those might be one of the more effective ways for us to get a set of qualifications and a set of experiences which really are conducive. So I think it's a lot to do with the kind of the people you're surrounded by in the community, and the kind of the misconceptions that are associated, just because we are sometimes horrible, mean people who say bad things about things we don't really know about.
Well, I mean, it's been a great discussion this afternoon, and the time has really flown by.
Yeah.
And I can see we've only really got 5 minutes left to sort of wrap up. I've really enjoyed thinking and talking with you today, and hearing the importance of really listening to our young people, being dialogic, using the technologies, being open-minded to the way that young people such as your sister are using technology and creating new models for education. This idea of digital credentials, young people creating their own pathways, the importance of choice and finding meaning. There's certainly a lot for me to take away this afternoon. With just the 3 minutes or so that we've now got left, you're both positive change makers. That's what Smiley is looking for. Not looking for, but it really loves to celebrate the work of people like yourselves doing positive things for society and in society. What are the key messages you would like to say to anybody listening today, either in support of what your work is or something they can think about as we wrap up this afternoon? Zubair, can I ask you for your one minute thought as we finish?
Absolutely. Yeah, as an entrepreneur, it's always about plugging. So I would love for young people or adults and parents who want to support their children with their educational kind of outcomes, especially around the kind of exam time, to check out Zenotes, and also to potentially contribute, either as student content writers or as interns. There's a lot of opportunities, and we hope that we can be, really supporting them in their educational journey, but also in their future careers and aspirations as well. So do check out Zenotes.org.
Brilliant. Will that be easy to find if Zenotes.org? We'll find that.
Or you just Google it and you'll
Google
you'll
it. Google it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zubair.
Absolutely.
David, another change maker. What would your request or ask into the cosmos be for today?
God, that's such a good question. I must admit, I'm glad you went with Zubair first, because I've drawn a little bit of a blank on that. I think it would be a request to all parents that are listening, because there's been quite a few questions that I get a sense from parents that just try and give your children the space to share and create those spaces where they can just be themselves. I think. I mean, we've got our centres. You're most welcome to go on to newmeaning.co.uk, have a look at what we do. If you're interested, get in touch. My ultimate sort of putting it out there in the cosmos would be that New Meaning was given the opportunity to run a pilot across multiple schools with a system that we've got, which would create quite a different dialogue between the teacher, the pupil, and the parent. And we'd love to pilot it. So if there's anybody out there that would love to have a chat about how we might get that off the ground, and that it'd be great to talk to them.
That sounds like a wonderful idea. Amy, I've had a great hour, or just slightly short of an hour, and I've been really inspired by both David and Zubair.
Me too. No, I was just wanted to echo what you said, Ray, about sort of what was coming out about listening to children and listening to students. Is something that really resonated with me, that I have heard so many times, either myself when I was at school or as I've grown up, is kids reaching their full potential. And I think the way you sort of positioned it, David, about it's about what is meaningful, what's a meaningful life to them. It's just, it's just sort of clicked something in my mind that I think is a really interesting point, and just making sure we listen to them rather than just saying the cliche. You can they can reach their full potential. But yeah, it's been fascinating, and thank you both so much for joining, and obviously you, Ray, for hosting the talk. For everyone who listened, thank you so much. We will have full details, including where to find out more about Z Notes and New Meaning on our site, and you can also watch back the full talk as well. But apart from that, hope everyone has a lovely afternoon and enjoying the sun, and thanks so much for watching.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.